winding down. They're just getting started. This is South Coast Tonight with Chris McCarthy and Marcus Farrow. They've got you covered on all the news of the day, from local issues to politics on both sides of the aisle. This is the place where the movers and shakers come to be heard, to listen, and where they're held accountable. This is South Coast Tonight on WBSM.
Welcome to South Coast Tonight. I'm Marcus. Chris McCarthy will be back on Friday, but now I am joined by Ted Nesi of WPRI. Hey, Ted, how are you?
Hey, Marcus. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. So we had a primary last night.
We sure did.
Yeah. So let's start from the top of the ticket and go down. Obviously, Maura Healey was unopposed, although Sonia Chang Diaz did get 15% of the votes in that primary, which I thought was interesting. But Jeff Deal beat Chris Doty. I thought some of the momentum went in Doty's favor, but Deal had a really strong polling lead pretty much the entire election season. But you would notice that there was one particular region in the Commonwealth that was responsible for Deal's victory.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't run the numbers to see, exactly where his biggest vote pluralities came, when you look statewide. But, boy, he did very well in Bristol County. He did 57%. Doty did 43%. And then over, if you look in Plymouth County, which, of course, is where Deal is from, he got 66% of the votes. So southeastern Massachusetts, a really important part of Deal's victory, because you saw other parts of the state where Chris Doty, held him pretty close. Out in Worcester County, it was 51-49. So I was surprised, Marcus, because I thought, frankly, Jeff Deal, he's been on the scene for a while. He has the support of President Trump, who, of course, is such a force in Republican politics. And, we've seen the Republicans have kind of rejected Charlie Bakerism. And while I know, people say Chris Doty is a bit more conservative than Baker, he was certainly more Baker-ish than Deal.
Sure.
And yet it turned out there were a lot more Republican voters out there in Massachusetts looking open to somebody like that. And they weren't necessarily rushing to Deal. I think this was a bit of a weaker showing for Deal than I expected, even though, of course, he is now the nominee. I do wonder if Howie Carr's late endorsement of Doty, I thought that was fascinating because not necessarily who I would have expected Howie Carr to go to. And,
right.
In a Republican primary, that kind of big endorsement can make a difference.
Yeah, no, I know. When that came in, I thought it was interesting because Howie's been so friendly with Trump. I mean, I think they're personal friends. Yeah. So, but I think it did. I think it did help him a little bit because Deal had like a 30-point lead in all of the polls, and I think the final lead ended up being 10 points. So, do you think that? I mean, it's widely believed by a lot of people that Doty had a better chance to beat to beat Maura Healey. But I'm wondering if the Republican Party just doesn't care. They want to elect somebody that's more aligned with their principles.
Well, I think that a couple ways. I think, first of all, definitely, in the end, and I don't care whether it's, sometimes the Democrats in some places will nominate someone who's not going to win the general because they like them better, and sometimes the Republicans do it too. So there's certainly some of that. But I also think, frankly, it was not at all clear to me anyway that Doty would run that much stronger against Maura Healey. I mean, we're seeing she has like a 30-point polling lead over both of them.
Yeah. And
all that money, we've already heard the Republican Governors Association indicate they're not going to invest money in Massachusetts this year. I never want to say, it's over till it's over, and I certainly don't want to bury the Deal campaign on the, day after the primary, but I think even they, I assume, would admit that he is a heavy, heavy underdog against Maura Healey. And, he needs her to, frankly, to screw up a bit in the next couple of weeks, maybe take some unpopular stances. And frankly, it's Massachusetts. I have to think he needs Donald Trump not to do too much for Jeff Deal and be too present in the race. Unless something's really changed in Massachusetts, that has not been a winner in recent years in the Bay State.
Yeah, the way I had seen it is I think Doty was Doty pivoted to a general election strategy while Deal was trying to win the Republican primary, which I guess worked.
Mm-hmm.
The lieutenant governor's race, though, between Campanelli and Leah Cole Allen, has that been called yet?
I was wondering the same thing just before we came in there. I got to check that. I'm looking. Yes, the AP has called that for Leah Allen.
Okay.
I'm looking at the numbers now. They called it about 10 a.m. this morning, I see now, but it hadn't been done for the overnight news. But that was a close one, 52-48.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. So there was, a slight possibility of a cross ticket primary election. So on the Democratic side, Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll won pretty easily. No surprise there. I think she was a strong candidate.
Strong candidate. The other thing I was thinking, you saw Maura Healey last night say, it's already historic to have a ticket with two women on it leading the ticket in Massachusetts. And, I think you can't underestimate, based on everything we've seen in recent months, how powerful the women's vote, the activism women are feeling. I mean, it reminds me of the early part of Trump's term with the Women's March, and then what we saw in 2018. Ever since the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade, you've seen, record numbers of women registering in some states. And so I think it is just an extremely, I've heard this from political professionals, it is just an extremely powerful thing in Democratic Party politics in this day and age to be a female candidate. There is a hunger for more women in leadership, and I think that was, not saying by any means that's the only reason Kim Driscoll won, but I do think that was a bit of extra momentum she had that Eric Lesser couldn't counter.
Yeah, I mean, she's just, Chris and I had her in studio a couple weeks ago. She's just, I think, very impressive on her own. But, yeah, it is the first time in U.S. history that there's a unified woman ticket for governor and lieutenant governor. And now so that means it's got to be the first time that there's been a straight ticket of entirely women entirely for these constitutional offices.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing is, whether it's Kim Driscoll in this race, I know we'll talk about probably briefly Diana DeZoglio winning in the auditor race, which wasn't necessarily expected. We both know, Marcus, you and I are political junkies. We can tell you a little biography of every person on the ballot by the primary day. There's plenty of voters who go in there ready to vote for maybe Maura Healey. Maybe they were coming in for Andrea Campbell or Shannon Liss Reardon. And then they're faced with all these names they really aren't super familiar with. And again, without downplaying anyone's victory, sometimes it comes down to, I think I want a woman in this election, or that last name sounds good, or I think I've heard of them, or I saw a sign for them. So I sometimes think in these lower profile races, we can almost overinterpret how much it was the candidate or the quality of their campaign, and it can also be just voters going in, and that name sounded good to them that day, and they were really voting on other races.
Yeah, no, that absolutely happens. Ballot fatigue's a thing too. There's a lot of ballots that are blanked. I was just looking at the Mattapoisett returns today, and there was so many votes that were blanked in a lot of these local races. Yeah, let's actually talk about Andrea Campbell and Shannon Liss Reardon. So I think you said it pretty well. Shannon Liss Reardon spent a lot of money to lose by that much.
Oh my God! I mean, I just I can't get over, honestly, the level of Lisa Kaczynski up at Politico. I can't remember the figure off the top of my head, but this was over double the amount spent by all the attorney general candidates in Massachusetts in 2014, just by Shannon Liss Reardon out of her own wealth, over $9 million of her own money. And she's losing right now as the final returns come in. Andrea Campbell's now topped 50%. She's at 50.3%. Shannon Liss Reardon way back at 34%. Wow. So, I mean, it's a good reminder, too, for all the concerns about money in politics. If the voters aren't buying what you're selling, you can buy another $1 million of ads. It's not going to do it unless something goes into those ads that changes their minds. You've got to have candidacy, and frankly, you've got to have opponents they're ready to leave. And I think Andrea Campbell was appealing. She's making history as well. It's the first, along with the Republican Secretary of State candidate, the first black woman to be at the top of a ticket like this in Massachusetts. But yeah, I mean, I do think, I obviously work in the Providence, New Bedford TV market, so I see all the ads that are on our air markets. And boy, Shannon Liss Reardon, I thought she was running for governor of Rhode Island sometimes. She was on the airwaves so much down here. And she did win quite a few places in Bristol County. She split the cities. I believe two went to Campbell and 2 went to Liss Reardon. So she might have seen some payoff there, but I don't think she could overcome Campbell's strength in the Boston area.
Yeah, that's where she did get some support. Liz Reardon did get some support down here from former Mayor Scott Lang and Tony Cabral, but I know Campbell got some support from our local city councilors. But yeah, Boston's where, and I think that's a reason why she won too. Boston's where the treasure trove of votes are. There's higher turnouts in the suburbs, and Boston itself is where most of the people are. And not to mention, Maura Healey spent pretty much all of her time during this primary for the last 2 months campaigning for her.
That is a great point. You're absolutely right. And look, we see how popular Maura Healey is in her own primary here, in the polling for the general election. So having her as basically your running mate for Andrea Campbell the last couple weeks, that's no small thing. I also noticed, Liz Reardon in her paid media, at least in the greater New Bedford area, in Providence, New Bedford, I never saw her make a case against Andrea Campbell, right? And as much as people say, oh, I hate negative ads, look, if you're not drawing a contrast and your positive case for yourself isn't getting you across the finish line, you better find some way to say, well, here's some things you might not like about the other person you're currently thinking about voting for. She never did that, despite spending all that money on paid media. It can be dicey in a primary to go negative, obviously, because there was blowback until last week. There was a third candidate. But, I do wonder if the Liz Reardon people are going to think, well, maybe we should have taken the fight to Campbell a little more than we did, considering where we wound up.
So Chris and I had on Monday. We had Andrea Campbell on at 8:00. She talked for a bit about what she was, her platform, but then she did hit Liz Reardon on spending her own money and self-funding. I know her campaign manager compared Liz Reardon to Mike Bloomberg and Tom Steyer. And so then I brought that up to Shannon Liz Reardon at 9:00, and Shannon Liz Reardon said, it's a shame that my opponent's going negative. So it seemed like she just wanted to try to stay on message.
Yeah, and look, Campbell was able to get this funny combination. If you think about the end, on paper, Andrea Campbell, a former, notable candidate for Boston mayor and city councilor, with the support of Maura Healey, among many others. She had Ayanna Pressley with her. She had Ed Markey, Joe Kennedy from down here was campaigning for her. A historic figure, first black. She had a lot going for her, and she was doing well in the polls, and yet she became perceived as the underdog, I think, in some ways, because of Liz Reardon's spending. So she got to be already one of the front runners, if not maybe in retrospect the front runner, yet people perceived her as getting, beaten up by this woman with unlimited wealth to pour into the race. Right. Those dynamics, I think, matter too. I think sometimes voters do sometimes get suspicious when they feel like that amount of money is being spent, unless someone's really sealing the deal. I mean, down here in our region, people watching on TV would not have known anyone else was running for attorney general. Right. Yeah. Just from the TV ads. Campbell, it was largely seen as like a coronation before the last couple of weeks when that polling, when the Shannon Liz Reardon tried to tighten up in polling. But the largest leader in that poll was undecided, which is the same thing for the next race we're going to talk about, which is Diana DiZoglio and Chris Dempsey for state auditor. That race was, Chris Dempsey always had like a 2-point lead in those polls. Yes. But agreed. So I was like, well, gun to my head, Chris Dempsey, because Dempsey, and I've had both of them in studio. I think they're great. But Dempsey had, Dempsey had the 2-point lead. He had the support of Mayor Wu. He's from Brookline. I figured the Boston suburbs would come out. Diana DiZoglio's from Methuen. But I think Diana DiZoglio, and just after sitting with her and see, her personal story and how she got elected and where, how she climbed, Chris and I keep on saying she burned the boats basically because she could have ran for Senate and got reelected, but instead she went for a statewide office. But she's a real force, I think, in state politics. Yeah, and look, I think some of the same factors we talked about earlier, a woman in a year when women are super activated and want to see more women in office. Yeah. She also had big support from organized labor, if I recall, which, in a race that, this was, compared to some of these other races, this was relatively close. This was 54-46. So, not too much has to swing for this election possibly go the other way. I thought Chris Dempsey as well had a strong shot. He's been fighting hard. He had the story around no Olympics in Boston and all of that he's worked on before, Thomas Patrick. But, I also think it was interesting. The polling in this one, as you said, kind of led us astray. It did. Or, at first I say that, but on the other hand, before the pollsters get upset, it is so hard to poll primaries. Marcus. Right. people swing so hard because they're not voting. You know, in a general November election, most people generally end up being R or D. So you don't have these massive swings election to election. In a primary where it's just on names and people don't know a lot, I think you really can have big swings at the last minute. And you don't even know why people made the decision. So Diana DeZoglia was a victor on that, and you know, she could be moving on up from there. Though I will say Anthony Amore, who's the Republican there, you know, again, it's pretty tough as a Republican to win any big races. But he's got Charlie Baker's support. He's an appealing candidate too. So interesting to see if he can get anything going there.
He's got Charlie Baker's support. He's got a great resume. You know, he says, I've done auditing, I've done investigations, I've been a watchdog my whole life. And he's, again, Charlie Baker's support. Charlie Baker, I think, for a reason, has only endorsed Amore, only put his weight behind Amore in the statewide races because he's the only one I think he feels comfortable attaching his name to.
Yeah, and, you know, now how much will Baker want to campaign for? You know, he won't be busy campaigning for governor. He's already said he's going to stay neutral in that, which is a statement in and of itself. So, you know, if Charlie Baker runs around the state with Anthony Amore, hey, you know, that could be something if Baker really wants to. But even then, to get people to pay attention to auditor and then split their ticket down there, it's going to take some work. But Baker's an X factor, I will say.
So we're speaking with Ted Nesi of WPRI. I think that covers the statewide races, unless we missed somebody. But
no, I think you got through it because I'm looking at my AP tack here.
So I do want to talk about, because we kind of had some exchange.
Oh, you know what we forgot, Marcus, is that Bill Galvin moves on, right? But
of course, we
never
forgot
say
about
die. We forget because he's just been around so long. We forget he even has to run an election. But
exactly.
In the end, he had no problem with Tanisha Sullivan.
Oh, that's one more point I wanted to bring up with Tanisha Sullivan, Quentin Palfrey, Chris Dempsey. Party convention endorsements are a waste of time. They don't matter. They clearly don't matter, as demonstrated by the results last night. So I want to talk about, because we had some exchange on this, the Bristol County Sheriff's primary, because I saw you reach, I guess you'd had some contact with the Bernier campaign. I was talking to Paul Harew's campaign, and, you know, I had said the whole time, I think Paul Harew is the strongest candidate. He's won elections before. You know, I had listed a bunch of reasons. Those reasons that ended up being true. But Bernier had initially said to you that at first he was thinking about a recount.
Yeah, I mean, when I got on the phone with Nick Bernier last night, so as you know, Marcus, we here is where I'm sitting in Providence on the other side of the border for where our TV station is. We had our big debate last night with the governor of Rhode Island.
Yes.
So I finally got out of the hall on that and finished because it was a live broadcast and said, all right, what's going on in Massachusetts? And I looked at Bristol County Sheriff, and we only had incomplete results, and Harew was down initially in the early returns just because of the order the cities were reporting. So I thought, where's this going? So I reached out to Bernier, and then he told me, he was like, here's the numbers we have. You know, it's not looking good. So I said, so we got on the phone, and he actually still today has not conceded. You know, he's sort of acknowledged he lost.
Yeah.
But he hasn't quite willing to say, I concede the race to Paul Harew.
Yikes.
So, you know, so when I talked to him, he said, well, it's either going to be a recount, which he has history with. He had a very close recount 10 years ago for governor's council.
He did.
Or, you know, it's I lost. And clearly at this point, everyone's called it. He's lost. But he's not endorsing Harew, which is an interesting thing. And, you know, probably is going to be a gift to Tom Hodgson, who's going to try to moderate his image a little, I presume, for the general election here, despite his association with Trump, because he can now say, well, hey, you may not love me, but the other guy is so far to the left that he can't even get his own Democrats to endorse.
That's exactly what's happening. And, you know, someone called when you tweeted that, someone replied under that Nick's a sore loser. And Nick had said, well, Hodgson's moderating his positions. This all seems to stem from the mailer, the infamous mailer that Harew sent out the day after the primary debate here. He's, I guess, pretty upset about that, because I think if he had said to you or somebody else, maybe it was in New Bedford Light, at least Tom Hodgson never lied to my face.
Yes, he said that to the Light. Yeah, and you know, I think, you know, part of me, you know, I take candidates at their word. He is very upset that Harew sent what I would argue is not the most negative mailer I've ever seen.
It's not negative at all. It's a contrast.
Right. It's just like I've won more. I've managed more people. Yeah. People have the right to respect their own. But, you know, took a lot of umbrage at that because he felt there had been a promise to basically do no even contrast, I guess, right? Let alone negative, and felt that was broken. And so now he will not endorse. But, that's going to be a headache for her, I think, if Hodgson makes hay of it, which I assume, Tom Hodgson is a wily, experienced campaigner. I doubt he's going to let something like that, be left on the back burner when he's in the first big fight he's had in a long time. Oh,
I believe he's already moved in on that opportunity. So,
there you go. Yep.
Yeah. So we're speaking with Ted Nesi, WPRI. Ted, before I let you go, you did have a governor's debate in Rhode Island last night. There is an open governor's race. Well, not open. Dan McKee's running for re-election, but he's, I guess, in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one, Marcus, down here in Rhode Island, because Dan McKee, as people might remember, he inherited the governor's office last year when Gina Raimondo was called to Washington to join President Biden's cabinet and left Rhode Island. So he is the incumbent, as you say, but he's not an incumbent who's ever been elected in his own right. So he's running for statewide office for the first time. And his polling numbers have just not been great the whole cycle. He's led in our polls, but only by a couple points. He's never cracked 30% support in the Democratic primary, even as the incumbent. He's got a strong challenger in Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea, who's another two-term statewide office holder. And then there's also former CVS executive Helena Foulkes, who's been, well into third place, I'd say, for most of the race. She's polled in the teens. But all of a sudden, she had a very strong debate performance last night. She had a strong debate performance last week. She's very wealthy and has poured a ton of money into TV commercials. And so at least I will say the others are starting to get a little nervous. Could she be taking off fast enough that she could pull an upset and somehow pull this out? Nancy Pelosi is actually coming to campaign for her on Sunday.
Wow.
Helena Foulkes. Yeah, because they're old family friends.
Wow.
Pelosi was Helena Foulkes' mother's college roommate. So she's coming to town. So we're going to have a big 6-day battle, I think, in Rhode Island with three people who all think they could win this nomination next.
The primary's next week, right?
Tuesday, yep. Tuesday night. We're back-to-back. It's always funny. We watch the rest of the country do their primaries, and we're just sitting back waiting for ours to get started. And all of a sudden, very end of the summertime, and it's just back-to-back around here,
Hey, is Alan Fung going to win that congressional seat? Is Rhode Island going to elect the first federal Republicans since Lincoln Chafee?
Well, first of all, always impressed with your Rhode Island knowledge, Marcus, so I give you props on that. You could beat me on Rhode Island and New Bedford, probably. So, Fung is by far the strongest option the Republicans had, and he had a small lead in a poll back in June, which is the only poll we've seen. He's raising plenty of money. He's got support from the party nationally. He's got a strong geographic base out of Cranston, where he was mayor. He's likely to face Seth Magaziner, the general treasurer, who's had a big poll lead. I guess the question it comes down to for me, Marcus, is we see nationally the Democrats seem to be strengthening a bit when they looked awful back in the winter and early spring, and that's when Fung got into this race.
Right. Back
then, people were writing off if the Democrats could hold the seat. They said Fung's, popular in Cranston, he's going to be fine, and there's going to be a Republican in Congress. Now it's changed a bit. The abortion moving to center stage, that is not comfortable territory for Fung. Magaziner's making hay out of that. Biden being a bit better, maybe some wavering Democrats are back. So I think that's going to be hard fought through the fall. But I certainly think there'll be the threat of a Republican winning that seat up to the end. The question is if Fung can run far enough ahead of the national party. Can he become a Charlie Baker type of figure, right? Who's not associated with Trumpism and therefore can win over Democrats and independents. He certainly has the background to try it, but he's not always distanced himself from Trump in the past. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. This is the 2nd district. So this is the western half of Rhode Island, Cranston, Warwick, and all the way down to Westwood.
Yeah, certainly something to watch out for. Ted, what do you got on Newsmakers this week?
We are going to do a recap for those who missed our governor's debate last night live. We're going to bring some of the highlights. We had a great pop quiz section that a couple of them flunked, which was interesting to see in the moment live on stage.
That's awesome.
And kind of look ahead to what we're going to see in the primary next week. So Tim White and I will have that Sunday morning at 10 a.m. And also, while I'm on, I'll say, Marcus, we're actually airing Newsmakers at a special time this fall. Fridays, 6:30 p.m. on Fox Providence if people want their political junkies want to get their fix early. We're doing that Friday nights through the November election.
That's excellent. Ted Nesi, WPRI, he's on TV. And thanks for joining me, Ted.
Marcus, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That was Ted Nesi, WPRI. They do great work over there. Definitely go check that out. And we're going to take a break. We'll be back. Tonight, that was Ted Nesi from Channel 12, WPRI. It does great work over there. Of course, there's a lot going on in Rhode Island, but he still keeps up with the Massachusetts stuff too. It's a lot. It's a lot. But Newsmakers is great. I actually like to listen to the podcast sometimes. Sometimes I just the Newsmaker, every Newsmakers episode I recently discovered comes in a podcast too, so you can listen to it. Him and Tim White do great work. Tim White we had on a few weeks ago to talk about that the biker gang story, which was really interesting. So definitely love having the WPRI people on the show. That was Ted Nesi again. So 508-996-0500. I do want to talk about, and speaking of podcasts, I'll get the podcast up from the first hour with DA Tom Quinn. We'll cover that. And I forgot to mention, I wanted to talk to him about this, but tomorrow, Kim Driscoll and Maura Healey are, the second day into their newly minted gubernatorial ticket, right? Kim Driscoll and Maura Healey that's the ticket. Healey Driscoll. They've already got the sign. I saw the sign. They've already got the Healey Driscoll sign, right? They're going to be campaigning in New Bedford. They're going to be in New Bedford tomorrow to get the endorsement of Mayor John Mitchell. So the day after they went to Worcester, right, which was today, the day after they secured the nomination, they went to Worcester, which obviously is important. Western Mass is a big enclave of voters there that people use. Because typically tickets, honestly, gubernatorial tickets a lot of times are like, the one from the Boston area and one, the 128 belt, right, and one from Western Mass. Tim Murray, mayor of Worcester, was Deval Patrick's running mate. Karen Polito was, I believe, is from Shrewsbury, which is in the greater Worcester area. So typically, and even I believe Leah Cole Allen and Kate Campanelli are both from the from Western or Central Mass. But Kim Driscoll's obviously more in the North Shore, Greater Boston area, along with Maura Healey. So the first thing they did was go to Worcester. The second thing they're doing is coming to New Bedford. They're going they're going to Plymouth and doing a thing with Senator Sue Moran. Then they're coming to New Bedford tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to be there to get the endorsement of New Bedford Mayor John Mitchell. Now, I've talked about this before. I think that when I spoke with Maura Healey on the record, and you can find that column on WBSM.com. I know a lot of people are still reading it, about Healey's trip to the New Bedford feast. She spoke very effusively, meaning unrestrained praise. Effusive means unrestrained praise. She spoke with unrestrained praise for Mayor Mitchell, right? She said really nice things about him, called him a steward for offshore wind, said he's doing such an excellent job, and said, the people in New Bedford, the spirit, everybody's in good spirits here, and I think it's because of the work that John Mitchell's done. So she said really nice things about him. And I would wonder if that is, they have a great relationship, clearly. The Attorney General Healey, probably soon to be Governor Healey, and Mayor John Mitchell. They have a very I think they have a very good relationship, very amicable at the very least. And I wonder what that's going to bring to New Bedford, what that's going to bring for Mayor Mitchell in particular, if she's considering him for a member of her appointed cabinet. Something to think about. But she's going to come down to New Bedford. I think it's significant that on their second day of the newly minted governor ticket, that Kim Driscoll, Mayor Kim Driscoll of Salem, now the lieutenant governor candidate, and Maura Healey, attorney general, the governor candidate, nominee on the Democratic side, have decided to come down to New Bedford, come down to the waterfront, and earn the endorsement of John Mitchell. I think that's big. And it's great that they've made a point to make themselves available to us at WBSM. We spoke with Kim Driscoll in here for an hour, and she was awesome. We heard a caller. Mention that he had heard Kim Driscoll and said that that candidate has earned my vote, and because she had such incredible depth, and I think was just a really impressive, sort of nonpartisan, right? Seemed, she's a Democrat, but seemed, nonpartisan in her policy positions and like pragmatism. So that's tomorrow. I'll be there and report on that after and let you guys know, what went down. What went down. And tomorrow's also the return of council post game. Paul Heroux is going to be calling in at 9 o'clock. And what I want to talk about with him is obviously his pivot to the general election versus Tom Hodgson. But the behavior of Nick Bernier in the last few weeks has been of a candidate absolutely abysmal. It has been so beyond what is and should be expected of a candidate for office, let alone countywide office, let alone sheriff. I mean, Ted Nesi agrees, right, that mailer wasn't negative. So if you've probably heard the story if you're listening, right, but we're just going to recap it again in case you haven't, so you don't think I'm being mean. They had a debate here, and they were all really nice. I mean, I think the three of them are generally nice people. George McNeil, Nick Bernier, and Paul Heroux, right? I think they're most, I think they're all nice people, and they, want to give back to the community. But they had a debate here. It was really civil and nice. Everybody played patty cake, but it was a good conversation, and a lot of people really enjoyed the debate. They said, we're not going to go negative, and I tried to make them go negative. I asked questions with the intention of making them go negative, and they with each other, just to throw some jabs at each other, and they didn't. Paul Heroux during that debate had drawn some contrast between him and the other candidates. Had said, well, I've won elections before. I raise money. I've gotten over 700 donations. You only have 160. You only have 60, right? I've raised over $84,000. I have that money on hand. You only have $3,000 on hand. You only have $900 on hand, right? So how can you think you can take on Hodgson, who has $300,000, is a 25-year incumbent, if you're not raising the money to move your message? Perfectly reasonable question. And they answered the question. George McNeil said, I'm self-funding. I wanted to self-fund. Dick Bernier said, I've been campaigning. I've been doing the campaign work a lot and not focusing on fundraising, but I think the money's going to come in the general election. But Heroux was just he was separating himself from, he was there the whole time making the contrast between him and the candidates because it's a primary, because it's an election. Because people need to choose between you or the other two people. So you need to tell them why they need to choose you if you want to win an election. And he did that. And guess what? He won the election. But Bernier then, called into my show. I invited him on the program because I wanted to be fair to him. I think Nick's a good guy. I wanted to be fair to him and said, what's your beef? What's the deal, right? And he said, I don't know. Because they sent out this press release that said Heroux's broken promises and how he abandoned his voters in Attleboro by running for another office while he's in office. Now, the returns last night show that Heroux got 2,500 votes in Attleboro and Nick Bernier got 500 votes in Attleboro. So Heroux beat Bernier by 5 times the amount of votes in Attleboro. But apparently, according to him, the voters abandoned him, right? I mean, he abandoned the voters. They don't seem to be mad about it. They keep voting for him in overwhelming numbers. Anyway, so he then makes fun of Paul Heroux for being single on my show, saying I can relate more to the people in the county than a 45-year-old never married guy who lives alone because I have a daughter and that makes me more relatable. Okay. Which I thought was a crappy thing to say. Again, the two the two hosts of this show are single, never married people without kids. Doesn't make us any less successful or relatable. We're all people. We all have problems. We all have things that we can relate to people with besides our ability to breed and our marital status. So I thought it was a crappy thing to say. Really didn't like it. And then he went on to say, and then after he lost, first he was talking about a recount, but now he's hinting at a potential endorsement of Tom Hodgson. He's hinted at it. He's almost outright said it, right? That he goes, well, at least Tom Hodgson's never lied to my face. And he's also said that Heru went too far left. When? When did he go too far left? In between the time that you said you'd support him if he won on my debate and, you know, the day after when he sent that mailer you didn't like? When did he go too left? It doesn't make any sense. 508-996-0500. Let's go to the phones. Good evening.
Hey, Marcus.
Hey, Pat, what's up?
I'm going to listen, but I'm just checking in now. I just wanted to say I'm happy with yesterday. I did vote for Andrea. I voted for Hayden. And well, obviously I can't vote in your local election, but
yeah.
I voted for Mara, but I guess she was expected to win.
Mm-hmm.
Expected to win. I'm happy, but do you are you surprised Andrea Campbell beat the big shot up? I wish I knew her name off the top of my head.
Shanless Rudin. No, I'm not surprised, and here's why. I mean, she was when she first announced she was going to run. She had a really heavy polling lead. She's got the most name ID, and she's got the most name ID in Boston, where you were voting in Suffolk County, and that's where all the votes really, not all the votes, but that's where a ton of votes are. And so she already had the name ID for running for mayor and being Boston City Council president. She got the support of Maura Healey, and then she, you know, even though Shanless Rudin was spending money and closing the polling lead on the day of the elections, Campbell had a 8-point polling lead in a poll that had been released that day. So she had still maintained a steady lead. She still had the most name ID in the areas that you really need to turn out for, and she had Maura Healey behind her. So I had said last night, gun to my head, Andrea Campbell's going to win that election. I did not expect it to be by this much, double-digit points. But, no, I'm not surprised. Again, until a couple weeks ago, it was largely seen as like a coronation, like she was going to win. So I'm not surprised.
Well, I checked in when you were talking about the sheriff's race, so I will hang up and I will be listening because I'm excited to hear what you got to say. Okay.
Thanks, Pat. Appreciate it.
Hey, later, Marcus.
So I actually got to take a break, and then we'll continue our conversation with the sheriff's race.
1420 WBS.
Marcus, Chris will be back Friday. Yeah, so Bernier had basically put out a statement and said he's not going to endorse Paul Heru because he went too far left, which, again, on August 17th here in studio, he committed to supporting him. He agreed that the number one mission of the Democratic nominee or the Democratic primary is to find the candidate who can best beat Hodgson. And after he lost, he then went on to blame the voters, and which is always the mark of somebody who is a sore loser. If you go on to blame the voters and say, I think they just gave Tom Hodgson another 6 years, that's the mark of a sore loser. That is a sore loser thing to say. I've heard it dozens of times before, and I've heard it from people who have lost, right, and are upset about losing. Right, I didn't think that was a nice thing to say to then take a dump on your voters after you lost an election. What message does it send to you about a candidate? I think Nick could have taken some good things out of this primary. He could have saw in his strong returns in Fall River and said, maybe I should run for city council, right? I won Fall River by 1,000 votes over Heru and McNeil. I got 2,500 votes in a three-way contested county primary. Maybe I should run for city council because the votes are there. There's certainly probably fewer votes than that's probably more votes than you're going to need in a municipal election. But instead, he just decided to sulk and pout and say Heru went too far left and then basically endorse Hodgson. So what was the point of the primary if you were going to just endorse Hodgson when you lost? It doesn't make any sense. And it's a sore loser crybaby attitude. It is. And I've had Nick on. I've talked to Nick a bunch. I think he's a good guy who's done a lot of work in the community. But the way he's behaving after this loss is just it's childish and immature. It's not becoming of a candidate. You just look like a baby when you do that stuff. You do. You look like a baby. Did you want to beat Tom Hodgson? Did you think that the people in Tom Hodgson's custody deserved a better sheriff? Was that your opinion? Or did you just want to be the nominee? Because with that reaction to losing, it sounded like the latter. It sounded like it's not about the people who are in Tom Hodgson's custody. It sounded like it was about yourself. 508-996-0500 is how you can get in the program. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
1420 WBS.
One more call in. Good evening.
Marcus, how are you, buddy?
Hey, Barry, what's up?
Too much. Marcus, I'm just wondering if you voted in person yesterday, and I don't know if this came up, but it was confusing for us down at Ward 6 because the Democratic ballot, the top of it was red, and on the Republican ballot, the top of it was blue, and it created a lot of confusion. Did you guys talk about this yesterday, Marcus?
No, I mean, I voted in person early voting. I think I did notice it was red, but I don't know what that's attributed to. I don't know why I don't know how or why they color their ballots in the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office. I think if
so it would have been Bill Galvin's office.
Yeah, it's Bill Galvin's office. They're the ones that print the ballots and send them out. They're in control of that.
Real confusing. They could have picked two other different colors, but to assign to the Democratic ballot the color red.
Well, he's been resoundingly basically reelected, so you've got a few years to lobby him for that change.